You're very welcome to the Firm and Fast Golf Podcast. I'm your host, Shane Derby. Today, we welcome Robin Bargmann back to the podcast for the next instalment of the serendipity of early golf. Last time, we concluded as early golf became popular in Scotland at the beginning of the 15th century. Today's episode explores various landmarks in the history of Flanders and the Netherlands, and how these times are associated with both the rise and subsequent fall of the Dutch game of colf. To be clear, that's colf with a C. This game of colf is indelibly linked to the ruling burgher classes, who commissioned Dutch master painters such as Averkamp and van der Velde to detail their colfing exploits. Along the way, we'll also take a look at the Protestant Reformation and the 80 Years' War, the fall of Antwerp, and the associated rise of Amsterdam, the Spanish Armada, the Battle of Waterloo, the Dutch East India Companies, and indeed the formation of the first golf club in the Netherlands in 1872, which was actually located in Batavia in the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Jakarta, Indonesia, which at the time was a Dutch colony. This episode very much sets the context for our concluding episode with Robin, where we will investigate the beginnings of Dutch golf from the 1890s. Once again, the depth of Robin's knowledge is extensive. I'm very grateful to him for the time he extended to me towards the series. Thank you to you for tuning in. We really hope you do enjoy the show. Where we left it on Friday, Robin, was that you suggested that golf as we know it started in Scotland in the 1500s and it started in Holland in the 1600s. So I guess I'm interested to understand how it started and what it looked like in Holland in the 1600s. I mean, I know there's a reference to the introduction of bringing the game to America. One of the earliest known mentions of the sport on the continent was known as a Dutch ordnance issued at Fort Orange, Albany in 1659. That was most likely colf, is that correct?
Yeah, that's colf with a C.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, but it's basically not relevant because it only relates to the Dutch colonists there.
Okay.
And New Netherlands, as it was called, was basically taken over by the English, and there is no proof or no suggestion at all that the English colonists who were taking over the business, the Dutch actually did stay there. The colonists who were there stayed there. A lot of Irish colonists also came in later. That was about 100 years later, and then another wave 200 years later. And there was always a bit of a fight going on between the Irish and the old Dutch colonists. As farmers, taking the land.
Sure.
There's no proof at all that the game of golf was in any way transmitted to the English or to the Americans that way.
Okay. So, I mean, maybe then I'm intrigued as to early golf in the 1600s in Holland.
Yeah. Well, the earliest document that we have is a school book of 1552, and it's a Latin school book made by Peter van Afferden. I think I talk about that in my book, in the Serendipity book. Do you have that, or?
I do have it. Yeah. That's
okay.
That's the lingua. That's the Latin poem, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a booklet used for schoolboys. That the grammar school in the old days was called the Latin school.
Okay,
and that was a preparation for university. The word university was also later, but about the same time. But anyway, at university, Latin was the standard language. So you had to learn Latin, and so this Peter van Avelen, he wrote a school book for Latin conversation. So it's not a dictionary; it's a conversation book, and he set it up actually in subjects like the kitchen or the house or the garden, and he actually also had 4 chapters on games. One was kaatspel, tennis. One was, I think, bolle, and that's actually putting the ball. It's in a way similar to a stick and ball game, but it's pushing the ball through a round piece of metal, huh?
Yeah.
A ring. I think some people call it ring ball. And then there was cards, I think, and of course, colf. And he describes actually how you play colf. It doesn't say there if it's played on ice or on land. I think it's played on land there. But if you read the translation, I've given the translation in English in the Serendipity book. If you put those, and I put in all the lines of the whole chapter, if you put them actually under each other, you can clearly see it's a long game, and that the goal is actually a hole in the ground.
Uh-huh.
So that's an early reference that they were already playing a game similar to today's game of golf, huh? Swinging at the ball and finishing at a hole where you have to put it into, and they do talk about putting it into the hole with a small stroke or a smooth stroke, and you're not allowed to push. That's also interesting. You have to hit it towards the hole. And this school book was used very much in the southern Netherlands, Flanders. It was first published in Ghent, near Bruges. But it was extremely popular. I think there were 16 editions, and the latest something in 1680 or so. But as I said, actually, the game developed as a game from this rough sollen met een kolver, a game played by individuals towards a target, and especially a hole in the ground on land, say around the middle of the 16th century in the southern Netherlands. There was a whole transformation actually during that period. We were in war with the Habsburg kings, with the overlords, for independence of the Netherlands. And halfway we gave up, and the northern Netherlands split off, and the southern Netherlands stayed part of the Habsburgs. And the southern Netherlands, which is now Belgium, and the northern Netherlands, which is now Holland, or also called the Netherlands, split off actually after 1585, the fall of Antwerp. And don't forget, actually, and about 60% of the population of Antwerp, which was the largest merchant town in the northwest of Europe, they all moved to the north. The rise of Amsterdam is all due to Flemish people and the golden century, the 17th century. But that's actually when this game of golf actually moved to the north as a game, say late 16th century. And what I have found is that it became a signature game of the new rich burghers who were actually in power in the 7 provinces we established ourselves as an independent republic. So we had no king in the northern Netherlands, and we basically made this parliament became the sovereign ruler of the Netherlands, and we were a republic. And we chose this model based on an earlier model in Venice. We actually did try to get Elizabeth, the famous Elizabeth, to be actually Queen of the Northern Netherlands, but she refused, and because she was afraid of a second Armada. But actually, the role of the Flemish in defeating the Armada was you only find that not in the English history books, but in the true history books on. They do exist.
Ones that have been researched properly, you mean?
Yeah.
Extensively.
If you go to the University of Ghent, there are many books on what happened there. Okay. I lost track actually Antwerp was closed off basically. Yeah, we closed Antwerp off. The waterway to Antwerp was closed off by the Dutch, because we didn't want the Spanish to have an entry there for their ships and therefore for their military. Yeah. It was basically the only large harbor available to the southern Netherlands. Bruges was already cut off. There was too much sand in the water there, so it wasn't deep enough. So, and that was and otherwise you had to land on the coast, the sandy coast. That doesn't work. Yeah. Actually, the 80%, 90% of the wealthy Belgians, let's call them Antwerp people, they all moved out. Antwerp was a ghost town. Uh-huh. And actually, it was the same language as the North. We all spoke Dutch. That's why actually scientists of the University of Ghent, for example, I know quite a few, and quite a few are speakers actually in Scotland frequently. Scots always say, you speak Flemish, and they say, no, Flemish speak Dutch. There's only one Dutch language. So you've got provinces, and Flanders, Brabant, Gelre, Holland. There used to be 17 provinces, and that was the United 17 Provinces. Charles V, the Habsburg king, who had his seat actually in Brussels, he tried to make a unified country of these 17 provinces. And that was basically the start of the revolt, because it meant central government in Brussels, the whole thing we're having now again, and a lot of taxes, direct income taxes and indirect sales taxes. And this was quite important, because moving power to Brussels basically means that you take it away from the large towns. Uh-huh. In the old days, towns were in charge of politics and the army. So a town like Antwerp and Bruges, they were hugely important. Large population, and the ruler of the town, which was usually a count, he was in charge. So he didn't like this thing going on with Charles V in Brussels establishing a large state consisting of 17 provinces. So what happened actually with the revolt, eventually, it was in Holland, every school kid knows about it. It's called the 80 Years' War, from 1568 to 1648. And it ended up actually with the Northern Netherlands being recognized as a sovereign state, albeit a republic without a king. And with the Flemish having a large influence, especially in Holland. Holland was one of the 7 provinces and made up about 80% of the economic power of the Republic. So Holland was and the provinces North and South Holland is what actually used to be Holland.
Huh.
And you have, of the south of that is Zeeland, and then you get Flanders.
Uh-huh.
And Holland, Zeeland, and Flanders were always very strongly united, usually had the same ruler. And it ended up actually all these 17 provinces by marriage. That's how it worked in the old days. These 17 provinces were all in the hands of the same man, which was Charles V of the Habsburg king. And so he, large part of Germany, Spain, and the Netherlands was all part of his realm. So it was fairly powerful, and so the revolt against the Habsburgs was quite a thing, and was all part of this Protestantism, which was also used. But it comes up quite a lot that Protestantism against the Catholic Church was important. It was, but it was used as an excuse, actually. The most important thing was obviously economic and political power. Uh-huh. But anyway, in the northern Netherlands, what developed because of all these Flemish in the north, what developed was their own culture, a new culture in Holland, and a new, very wealthy burgher class who were basically in charge of the Republic and who ruled the Republic through the States General. And you also had the Prince of Orange, of course, who basically led the revolts in 1568, and who was always considered, actually, he was the lieutenant for Charles V and later Philip II, the great enemy of Elizabeth. He was murdered, and but basically the Orange Nassau family, was always put in charge of the military side of the revolt. So the Oranges were always head of the army and the navy, but never actually in charge of the country. And they were called stadtholder. And a stadtholder means a lieutenant. Stad is a place, and a holder is you hold the place of. Huh. Interestingly, is linguistically the word steward and stadtholder is exactly the same. And actually, the Stuart kingship also evolved from being a lieutenant for the king, a steward of the king. A steward is also etymologically comes from steward, and stay is a place, and wart is holding.
Okay.
Place. So stadtholder and steward is interesting. They all have the same background, is that you basically rule in place of the king, and you become more powerful than the king, and you basically take his place.
Fascinating. That's
why the stewards became king, and in Holland, the stadtholders also became the head of the country.
Okay.
And after Waterloo, but that's a whole different story, Britain needed a state in between Germany, France, and England. So that's when the 17 provinces, the North and the Southern Netherlands, were actually put together again and made a united kingdom after Waterloo. Uh-huh. That lasted until 1830. That's what the Belgians say, and we say 1840. It lasted 10 years before independence was given to them. But that's when the two countries split off again, because the Southern Netherlands had actually always been part of the Habsburg culture, Catholic, ruled by aristocrats, and the Northern Netherlands were Protestant, and ruled by the Burghers, always a democratic. So, culturally, the North and the South were hugely different.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, after the fall of Antwerp and basically the rise of the Republic, due to this influx of capital from the southern Netherlands, mainly Flemish and Brabanders, there was also a what you saw is that they had their own. Well, in the north, there was a need of an own signature game, and this actually coincided with these long cold winters, especially between 1575 and 1650. Winters were extremely cold, and this was part of the Little Ice Age. But especially during that period, winters were, say, 25 to 30 degrees below centigrade and lasted 3 months. So all waterways were frozen, and warfare was impossible. So actually, during 3 months, economic and political life came to a standstill. So there was enough time to do other things. And that's when a lot of Dutch games, which were usually played on land, moved to the ice. And why? Because, there was a lot of water, of course, and the surface was flat. And you could see, actually, especially it started with the paintings of Pieter Bruegel, where you clearly see these villagers actually enjoying themselves with games on ice. Interestingly, there is actually in the southern Netherlands, the people enjoying themselves on ice in winter are, the typical villagers and farmers and kids, but not wealthy burghers. And you see, actually, once life changed in the northern Netherlands and they developed their own games, and colf became a signature game of the wealthy burghers. And if you look at the paintings, and you see a very well-dressed man. If you look at the paintings of Antwerp, and I've actually addressed this much more in my last book than in the Serendipity book, although you can see, if you look at the paintings from the southern Netherlands, it's basically the peasant playing games, and in the northern Netherlands, it's the wealthy burghers. And those were the people. The Dutch masters actually sold their paintings to their rich clientele, which was the wealthy burgher. And what did the wealthy burgher in the north want? Which is the basis of the Dutch masters, the golden age of the Dutch masters. Rembrandt, Frans Hals, all those guys, you know them. And for golf, it's important to know Averkamp and Van der Velde. You can see that the people playing golf are the wealthy burghers. And the paintings they bought had different genres. Still life, so the flowers, portraits, and landscapes. So those were the three genres that the Dutch masters painted and the clientele bought. Don't forget, in the old days, the master paintings were working for the church, so you had religious subjects. It changed a bit with the Renaissance and the Protestantism and different burgher classes. But religious paintings in the north, Rembrandt started actually with religious paintings, but he moved on to portraits, and then he actually stayed with portraits, although he didn't like it. And you had group portraits. The Night Watch is basically a group portrait of the Civil Guard of Amsterdam. You had a lot of civil guards. And those were actually also the wealthy burghers. Huh? It was not a professional army. Basically, the wealthy burghers defended the town with their... It's like you have in Scotland, like the Royal Company of Archers is basically, we call it schutterijen, shooters. And shooters were basically also archers in the beginning. So the Royal Company of Archers and schutterijen in the Netherlands are basically the same type of organization. And so from those paintings, basically the portraits, and especially wealthy burghers would portrait their kids. And sometimes they were very proud of their kids. And sometimes they would portrait their kids with a colf in their hands, huh? Holding a colf. I've got through Christie's, I purchased a famous one myself. And that's The Boy in the Blue Dress Holding a Colf by Bartolomeus van der Helst. My wife was a bit surprised. I heard from a friend of mine who is a tennis historian in London, a very wealthy American girl. She knows everything about real tennis. And she said, your favorite portrait is up for sale in Christie's. Did you know that? I said, oh, shit, I didn't know. And so I checked and I had 2 days. So I registered at Christie's, and you have to show that you have enough deposits or whatever. Uh-huh. And I thought I'd check. But this was actually an auction of surrealist paintings by Magritte, Salvador Dali, and you had this Bartolomeus van der Helst of the 17th century with the portrait of the boy in the blue dress and the colf in his hand. But anyway, I registered, and so I played. I set a limit for myself. I think I played the game not being too quick, and then so I actually reached my limit, but I could clearly see it was online like this. I could clearly see the guy in front with the what's his name? What do you call those people? The head of the
auctioneer.
Oh, the auctioneer. Yeah. He was looking at the front row, and what you have is some usual traders sitting in the front row. And so he looked at him, and he said no. Okay. So and then he dropped the hammer, and I had to phone my wife. Anyway, it's not important, but I thought it was an important thing to get back to the Netherlands. It had been, and I think it was taken to England by Princess Mary, who was married to the mother of William III, and Mary Stuart. She was painted by van der Helst also, and so I think this is an allegory on her son. So it would be William III. But I told you Friday that the oranges and the aristocracy didn't play colf, but the colf did have a certain meaning. So if you see all these portraits with little boys, they look like little girls because little boys were also wearing dresses, huh? And that's why sometimes they say it's a girl, but they're all boys, and you can see by their dress that it is a boy or a girl. The colors are different. They're portrayed with a colf in their hand, and the oranges didn't play colf, but in these paintings of the rich burghers, they had attributes like dogs or drums. A dog is a symbol or a metaphor for loyalty. And fruit is actually a metaphor for fruitful life, many kids. And the colf, interestingly, is a metaphor for discipline and a good pupil. So if you see a portrait of a boy with a colf, it basically means he's actually a good pupil. He's a very disciplined boy. Uh-huh. Sometimes it's wishful thinking of the father giving the. But it's not because the boy played colf. You see, there are always portraits of 3-year-old boys, so they don't play colf. Uh-huh. But anyway, so in the north, golf had become a signature game, and during winter time, all these games moved to the ice. Now, the interesting thing, I talked about the Bollen game yesterday to you, and Bonspiel, you remember?
Yeah.
Bollenspel. And basically, that's a game played with wooden balls, and you roll it over the ground. But these are not perfectly round, these balls, these bollen. I'll help you a bit. The game of bowls, etymologically, bowls and bollen is etymologically connected. And the way it's played is it's over land, and the balls curl. And the reason they curl, they're not round, but they're basically flat on two sides, kind of flat. And one rounding is more round than the other. So if you roll that, the ball will
curve.
Yeah, curl.
Yeah.
And that's why the word curling, actually, because in curling bonspiel, as we called it yesterday, in Dutch it's called a krulbollenspel. Now you hear the similarity. Krulbollenspel, curling bonspiel. The game was played over land, and during winter what they did is these were flat things. They basically put them on the ice and stuck a wooden pen on the side, and then shoved it over the ice towards the target. So there are many 16th century paintings, especially by Beugel, Pieter van der Breugel, Pieter van der Breugel, where you see this boller game being played on ice. So there's actually a lot of discussion going on with Scottish curling historians. I try to explain to them that basically the curling game as we know today, played with stones, is an assimilation of a Scots game where granite stones were thrown over the ice over a long distance, using strength and not technique. Those cuting stones, as they call them, they're not round at all. So triangular, they had a handle, so you could throw them large distances over the ice. And at the same time, in Scotland, you also have the wooden bowls like we had in the Netherlands, and they were actually also put on the ice. So you had two types of instruments that we used on ice. So actually the wooden bowl and the granite stone were basically merged, and they used the round stone. So the stone developed into a round ball similar to the wooden one. And this was all, say, 15th, 16th century that the round stone actually became popular, and made by the same Flemish who basically developed the game of golf in Scotland. So yes, actually in the Northern Republic, you see this game of golf being played on ice during wintertime by the rich burghers. And they loved being portrayed by the Dutch masters to show off in their homes. Look how much money I have, and this is what I like. And they like having portraits of themselves, and indeed also portraits of or landscapes with the game of colf on it. But actually, the power of the rich burghers suddenly came to an end in the Orangist revolt of 1672. Actually, the Republic had become too powerful, and especially England, hated the fact that we were the master of the seas and basically monopolized the trade at sea. And although we reinstated Charles II as King of England in 1666, he was actually put back in power. I was going to say the Glorious Revolution, but that was 1688, when William III was put on the throne in England as King of England, King Billy.
Yeah.
Before that, actually, after Charles I had his head cut off by Oliver Cromwell, the sons Charles II and James II basically lived in the Netherlands, and we had a palace for them built in. They used the palace in Breda, and although the family was all in The Hague, but they were a lot in The Hague, but we couldn't demonstrate too much that they were close friends of the Oranges, because we didn't want to annoy the Habsburgers and the French king, Louis XIV, not the greatest friend of William III. But anyway, after Cromwell was defeated, using a lot of influence, political power, financing, Charles II was shipped back to London by the Dutch fleet and military, and basically reinstated as the King of England. There's also a famous Dutch gift given to him by the city of Amsterdam, which is worth, in today's value, about 3 billion euros of Dutch art. So that was given to him, and it's basically the main part of the royal collection. The Dutch art in the royal collection is the Dutch gift given to Charles II in those days. If you go to Wikipedia and look at Dutch gift, you'll see the history of that. It's interesting. But we thought that he would actually be our friend, but the Navigation Act, which was instated by Oliver Cromwell, and it basically stated that any goods coming into England have to be shipped by English ships, and any English goods shipped overseas have to be shipped in English ships. So it's basically taking Dutch ships out of international trade. And if anyone violated that, it was reason for military intervention, if you put it in today's terms. But so this was actually the reason for the fact that in total 4 battles at sea were fought out. Officially, we call it the English Wars in the 17th century, but they basically depleted our treasury. So by 1672, the Republic was almost bankrupt. And then I think it was still Charles, or maybe it was his brother, James II, who, it doesn't matter. Anyway, Charles II who was supposed to be our friend, actually became our largest enemy because of the pressure of Parliament. He was basically pretty envious about the wealth and power. But he, in 1672, he made a deal with the French king to invade. He would cut off the seas, and Louis XIV would come with his army from the south, and then they would divide the Republic between England and France. That was the deal. So this was actually the time when William of Orange, and he was only, I think at that time, 1672, he was about 22 or 23, young guy, but he was very talented, well educated, and he had a proper hate for the French. And Louis XIV hated him in reverse too. Those two were not friends. So the Dutch population basically blamed the rich burghers who were in political power in The Hague for this disaster, with the English on there and the French army in Utrecht. So there was this Orangist revolt, and actually the leaders of the Dutch burghers, political burghers in The Hague, they were basically lynched. And William III was they always denied that it was his instruction. So we don't want the family of Orange to be murderers, but it was quite clear. And basically William III was in power. And from that day on, actually you don't see anything that relates to the game of colf anymore. And why? Because it was a game of the rich burghers and they were thrown out. So if you were seen with that, you were a collaborator with the enemy, you see.
Okay.
And some people say it's because the winters became less cold, and also religion changed a bit. In Protestantism, it became a bit firmer that you weren't allowed to wage such large sums of money playing colf and things like that. So colf was, in a way, seen by the church as being the reason for bad behavior by burghers and things like that. But anyway, the main reason was actually the Orangist revolt and the powerful burghers being put out of power. That's why actually, so the clientele was gone, and the Dutch painters actually never came back with portraits of golfers on the ice, you see. And no portraits of boys with golfs in their hands. Everything related to the game of golf would disappear. And the new game of golf that was already there, played by basically the inns. In a way, they wanted to develop income for themselves. Inns became social institutes for burghers to convene. So what you have to do is arrange facilities for them around the inn and the taverns for them to play. And that used to be the ring ball and the bowls, but they developed this new game of golf, basically in the same.
The indoor version, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. The indoor game. The 5 to 15 meter game with boards, which still played. I think there are 13 courts remaining in the Netherlands. In the mid-19th century, I think in the Netherlands there was something like 1,800 golf courts. It's amazing how that, but that disappeared actually at the end of the 19th century. With rich, but anyway, but it's still there.
Maybe if we could take a look, Robin, at the Dutch East India Company, and I know early modern something I read recently was that in 1872 in Batavia in the Dutch East Indies, so present-day Jakarta, that I believe was the first, in inverted commas, Dutch golf course. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the first course in the Netherlands, because Dutch East Indies were part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, to put it actually in official terms.
My apologies.
No, that's all right.
So in terms of obviously the early pioneers, and presumably there was some interaction between the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, and that may be how the early seeds of golf were sown in present-day Jakarta. Would that be right?
After Waterloo, the Dutch East Indies became French, but the French actually didn't have any interests out there. And the British had quite a lot of interest there, Malacca and places like that, which is now Malaysia, India, and the Isles were all the Dutch East Indies. So the British had a large commercial interest there and didn't want the French actually too. So after the annexation of the Netherlands, a small British fleet was sent to Batavia to take Batavia, and that was taken within. The only people sitting there were the Dutch, of course. Officially, it was French, but there weren't any French. So they easily took Batavia, planted the British flag there, and Raffles was made Governor General of Batavia. And this was 1809, say, yeah? After the annexation of the Netherlands. So they basically took the Dutch East Indies. And then in 1815, after the defeat of Napoleon and the decision actually to establish the Netherlands as an independent sovereign state or kingdom, the big question was, and this was William I having this discussion with Castlereagh and the king. He said, "Look, you can establish the Netherlands as an independent state, but a state without colonies cannot survive." An interesting remark, actually. So the main income for the Netherlands would be international trade and the colonies. So if you take away, and Raffles had sent a letter to England and saying, we should never give up the Dutch East Indies, especially Java, which is hugely rich and a main source of income for the United Kingdom. So there was a bit of a discussion going on, but in the end, because of the role of the Netherlands actually in the defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo, they felt that they couldn't actually refuse to give the Dutch East Indies back to the Netherlands. So Raffles was told to give up the Netherlands, and he was actually ordered to cross the Sumatra Strait.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's and on the point of there was this small island of Singapore. So he was instructed actually to have his base in Singapore and actually develop Singapore as a harbor town, as a trading post. So that's how Raffles in Singapore started. Or the Dutch East Indies given back to the Netherlands, say around 1816, 1800, that time, and that Raffles had to establish himself on the other side of the road. The political decision was made, and part of the political decision actually to reinstate the Dutch East Indies as a colony of the Netherlands was a commercial collaboration and joint ventures for developing mainly Sumatra, and that's the island next to Java, which was kind of undeveloped yet, and to develop Sumatra in the 19th century and to set up plantations and build mines. So there were huge tin and oil reserves, and the plantations were rubber, coffee, timber itself, things like that. And for the development of that, there was a lot of joint ventures were actually set up with the British. And this actually brought commercially the British and Dutch families together. And these were rich families, aristocratic families also. Actually was the basis for a lot of interrelationships between the British and the Dutch families. So actually back in these families were, going back and forth and mostly established themselves in The Hague. And what you see is that the beginning of golf in the Netherlands was these families who had been educated in England too. There was also a British school near The Hague, where rugby, tennis, football, cricket were all introduced. Those were the games of those days. The new British games. There was this new culture of organizing games and set the rules and set the standard uniform rules, uniform clothing. It's all normal for us now, but don't forget it was kind of new in the 19th century. So a lot of, call it, the British culture was introduced to the Netherlands through interrelationships between Dutch and British English, especially English families. You can actually see that the founder of, or the first, the founder of the Hague Golf Club, Van Brine. His wife was basically English, and the kids had been educated in England too, partly, mostly in The Hague. And Bobby Borrell is an important Dutch guy. I've written about him actually in Through the Green. It gives a great example of Anglo-Dutch relationships and golf. He was considered by Horace Hutchison to be the best golfer of his time. Of course, his father was related to the Waldorf family, the richest family in the US. So his father's mother was a Waldorf. They were basically the prime socialites in Po. And actually, you had Po and Biarritz. Some considered Biarritz to be a better golf course. I'm talking about the 1890s, the last decade of the 19th century. Belle Epoque. It's a great time to have been alive and to be part of actually the elite, but anyway, in Po, the socialites of Britain and America joined, and the British socialites were also Dutch. But the Dutch socialites there were always married to the British. And at the Batavia Golf Club, I'm saying this because the Batavia Golf Club started in 1872, and I don't think it was a very active golf club, but it was established by a British gentleman who was later, I think he represented the British government, and he was later posted in the north of Australia and founded a golf club. In Golfica, there's an article about him. And he actually played an important role in the beginning of golf in Northern Australia. So after he left Batavia, I don't think it was mainly the Brits living there. So golf, don't forget in those days that golf was played by with this new ball, not very popular yet. Yeah, it was popular, but it got a Percha ball. How do you pronounce it, Percha or Percha?
Percha.
Percha, okay.
And I guess there's a serendipity there as well, in that the raw material for the gutta percha ball comes from
Malaysia. Yeah, that area, exactly. If you've had a good treatment by your dentist, there's a large possibility that you've got some gutta percha in your teeth.
Oh, yeah?
If you have a channel treatment,
yeah,
or a root, how do you call it?
A root canal, yeah.
A root canal. It's basically quite painful, but they basically empty it.
Yeah.
And then they put gutta percha in it.
Wow, I didn't realize that. You're a mind full of so much information, Robin.
Well, that's why I use the word serendipity.
Yeah. Once you start scratching the surface, there's so much more depth to history and so many.
It makes it, well, I think you have to always go to the context to understand something.
Yeah.
So if you want to understand the interrelationships between the Oranges and the Stuarts, you have to go to the history.
Yeah.
So what I've come across is that the kingship of James IV is actually hugely important in establishing a new culture and new games.
Uh-huh.
But I'm basically inviting the Scottish historians to do more research. I haven't done more than pointing into a direction and saying, look, the game of golf in Scotland was developed around 1500 after the crossover of the catchbill ball to this game of colf as an individual game, playing a ball towards a target and being a hole in the ground and being played on links land. So it's a natural ground to play a game with a stick and ball on. And those grounds were actually owned by the feudal system, basically owned by the king. And he would sometimes actually give grounds to a town, like Brunswick Links. You know Brunswick Links?
Yeah.
And I think that by David I that was given, so it's a long time ago, it basically given to the city of Edinburgh, to the civilians as a playground for eternity. That's why it's still a playground, you see. It's a royal gift. If the rules say it has to be a playground forever, you're not allowed to change it, you see. Otherwise, Brunswick Links would have been developed in an urban area. I do think that Brunswick Links in the history of the game of golf is hugely important. It would be nice to see Scottish historians look into that period of, say, in and around 1500, because clearly if you look at the material golf in Scotland is played with, first of all, the ball, it has to be, those balls were available. It has to be that they used the catchbell ball, I would say the tennis ball, for playing on the links. Now, maybe they made them stronger and made them heavier.
Many thanks for tuning in. As usual, you can find us online at firmandfast.golf or on Twitter at firmandfastgolf. Please continue to like, subscribe and comment. It really is appreciated. Until the next time, happy golfing.